Thank you for coming. Welcome to the, including Limerick, it's like the 4th day or something, since Wednesday, Thursday. And as you, those that have been in past IKT congresses, this is the symposium section, which is usually the more intellectual or academic part of the whole event. And we will be here until more or less 12:15, and then we will still stay in this building where we'll do a visit to the galleries, and we'll be meeting the director of visual arts program here. I'm going to do a brief introduction to the rationale of the symposium, and you will see it's going to be very personal and a reaction to my first time, to the first time I came to Northern Ireland. And then I will invite our guests to come on stage and also deliver their presentations and conversations. There will be, rather than usual, there will be pairs of speakers, and ideally there will be moments for you to address directly them before the general discussion. So after I speak, two of our guests will come, and then there will be a moment in which we can engage with them, and then another two guests, then a moment for us to engage together, and then all together here, there will be more time for us to discuss some of the ideas that were generated during this time. Is that okay? Lovely, thank you. So I'll just sit now and read and go follow sort of a PowerPoint presentation. So I first visited Northern Ireland in 2010, and it was in the context of an experimental curatorial residency set up by the Context Gallery, which is the former iteration of CCA London Derry, which we will visit in the afternoon and tomorrow. So this was in 2010, and before I arrived, my scant knowledge of the city was based mostly on photographs I'd seen somewhere of Bloody Sunday in 1972, and songs by the punk band The Undertones, which are from Derry, which I'd listened to throughout the 1980s. In both cases, there were narratives and there were messages I knew I'd missed. Growing up in Portugal, the events and conditions at which the image and music hinted were too foreign to catch my attention beyond mere curiosity. After I arrived in 2010, I found out that I was continually surprised at how little I knew about the region, its people and its memory, its imagination and its imagery. As an European citizen, I should have known, for instance, of the 1988 and 81 hunger strikes in May's prison. But no, I had no clue about it. The expression troubles, which all of us have already heard in these few days we've been here, the expression troubles, which encapsulates so much of Northern Ireland recent history, how was it possible that it barely rang a bell to me? So maybe I shouldn't be confessing my ignorance to you all. Instead, I will outline the rationale behind the symposium. But as it turns out, the two are connected. As a curator committed to socially driven art, I couldn't imagine undertaking research about Northern Irish art scene, as it was my mandate at the time, given how politically charged it is still today, without simultaneously embarking on a journey of discovery into unofficial narratives and unofficial practices. Thus, I committed to visiting Northern Ireland at least once a year since then. And although I will certainly continue to travel to the region, I cannot help thinking of this symposium as a sort of culmination of my adventure. Of course, I could not propose a topic other than dissent or antagonism. I checked my field notes, I read into the reviews I wrote, I saw the pictures I took. What emerged from all these elements were flags and more flags, murals and more murals. As you can see, these were the ones we visited yesterday. A shrine and the wall. Please bear with me. I am from a country with centuries-old independence and centuries-old borders. I am from a community where religion has never been a cause of division given the predominance of one single faith. I am from a territory that has never been colonized. In Northern Ireland, the iconography that I encountered was completely new, and I found I could only understand it as full of symbols of dissent and antagonism. Yes, I am aware that the 1998 Good Friday Agreement was a key development in the Northern Irish peace process, and yes, a zone of conflict is usually characterized by a disruption of everyday life, which I did not witness in Northern Ireland. But zones of conflict are no longer defined exclusively by military engagement. More and more often, they encapsulate other circumstances of dissent and antagonism. Indeed, today, zones of conflict are potentially everywhere, from downtown New York City to a square in Athens, the streets of Ciudad Juarez, or even Kiev, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Not to mention Iraq and everywhere else the so-called war on terror has been fought by the US. So, the conspicuous presence of Irish and British flags across Northern Ireland and intriguing display, it should have been the opposite, so I'll be back. And so the conspicuous presence of Irish and British flags across Northern Ireland and intriguing display of Palestinian and Israeli flags alongside them is evidence of this condition I was just describing, even if these kind of symbols operate more on the level of the collective and cautious than as markers of the fact of reality. Another evidence of this condition is not far from us. The walls in Belfast, known as peace lines, which separate nationalist Catholic and loyalist Protestant neighborhoods in order to minimize violence between their inhabitants. But where else is there an infamous wall segregating populations? And this relates to the fact that Palestinian flags are side to side with Irish flags in Northern Ireland. That's in Jerusalem, of course. So, as strife erupts in different parts of the world, it seems that governments develop similar strategies to impose sovereignty and authority. Wall building seems a particularly popular means to this end. The Berlin Wall may have fallen in 1999, but that did not bring about the end of fences and checkpoints everywhere. On the contrary, they proliferated both between and within nation states. Think of China and North Korea, Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, India and Pakistan, North Korea and South Korea, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And we are all aware of the issues surrounding the US-Mexico border, but have you heard of Melilla, the Spanish exclave in Northern Africa, a city surrounded by Morocco? Please bear with me again. I cannot even dream of what it means to live on a daily basis in a zone of conflict. My mind, my body, they know nothing about it. And forgive me for saying so, but I couldn't help but being fascinated by it. Apologies for employing such a glamorous word as that. But the more I excavated the issues in Northern Ireland, the more this unfamiliarity revealed itself. And the more fascinated I became at the realization that I could never grasp more than the surface of the layers and layers of this contested terrain. So, what exactly is this symposium about? For me, it examines or attempts to examine ideas generated in zones of conflict through the point of view of artists and writers who were born and or live in such spaces. For me, it was really important that it would feature the voices of those who have experienced what I, and most of you, I assume, never have. What I propose to our guests is that they would jointly discuss how their work responds to comments on or speculates about dissent and antagonism. I hope this symposium will illuminate us as curators in thinking about the intersection of art with questions that are relevant to both Northern Irish and international politics. This is why the format of the symposium is based on dialogues rather than monologues. Two artists, Willie Doherty and Ahlam Shibli, will discuss their work with Declan and Ihab Saloul, two writers who have thought deeply about it. Willie is from Northern Ireland, and Ahlam is from Palestine, and Declan is from Northern Ireland, and Ihab is also from Palestine. Mia Lerm will wrap up the event with concluding remarks. Contrary to me, she has been here for a long time, and she will present a perspective that not only will revisit the themes that were addressed during this time we were together, but will also raise questions for future debates according to her unique perspective. Believe me that when I say it is worth hearing what they all have to say. I will not dishonor Willie and Ahlam by attempting to summarize their intellectually rigorous and formally rich work in just a few sentences. nor will I do such a disservice to Declan, Ihab, and Mia. You might have seen Willie's poetic film Secretion at Last Documenta, or Ahlam's recent poignant survey show at Makba, Jeu de Paume, or Saloul's museum. These references are enough to demonstrate their relevance to the art of our time. And if you have never read any of Declan's, Ihab's, or Mia's pieces of writing, I suggest you do so, as you'll not regret it. For now, it suffices to mention that their teaching positions, Declan at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, Ihab at the University of Amsterdam, and Mia still at the University of Ulster, here, soon at the University of Amsterdam as well. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues from the IKT board, as well as the organizers of the IKT Congress, for their support in the delivery of the symposium. I want to thank our hosts, the MAC, where we are, and you, Mulholland, the curator of the MAC, which we'll see very soon, as well as Faye Hobson, Ian Dara, and all the technical team, including Chris and Simon. Last but not least, I want to thank to Ahlam, Willie, Ihab, Declan, and Mia for their contribution. And now I will hand over to Declan, who will present their thoughts on this topic.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's early on a Saturday morning, but it's great to be here with Willie, and it's a great honour to be invited by Miguel and the IKT Congress to speak with you all this morning. Welcome to Belfast. I hope you've been enjoying your travels in Ireland and now in the north of Ireland. And you'll continue to enjoy this as you head on northwards. Miguel had asked us, as he indicated there, to speak about dissent and representation. And dissent is a good subject in Northern Ireland. And I suppose it's a good subject because it's a difficult subject. And as Miguel indicated, that there has been a peace process here that many of you will be informed about, and some of you perhaps less informed about. And one of the characteristics of that peace process, perhaps like many other peace processes, has been about the creation of consensus, a gradual, steady, difficult effort to try and create a consensus among contending, disagreeing, fundamentally opposed parties and positions. The idea of advocating dissent in the context of that peace process is a troubling one for many people in lots of obvious ways. There's a fragile peace which has been maintained since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, more or less, in 1998. And in a way, the devolved form of government which reigns here is one which is about the maintenance of a particular form of continuing consensus. But of course, the idea of dissent remains an important one, insofar as we might wish to find ways to express things which are not articulated by mainstream politics, or that are not finding their way into coverage in the mainstream media, or that aren't being given expression through popular culture. And so to locate and to create types of dissent might be something that has real power and value. And it may also be then, we could perhaps argue, that dissent is a way of allowing a kind of openness about the difficulties of the present, to somehow be able to continue to say, maybe there are alternatives to the way in which the present system of governance is enacted and in operation. Or it may be also that dissent allows us to somehow express and address the anxieties of the past. To be able to talk openly and fairly about all of the disagreements and hurt and trauma that have been such a devastating part of the society for decades and longer. It's sometimes argued that maybe in certain instances, contemporary art practices in the north of Ireland, in that period since 1998, a period that we might choose to talk about with some anxiety as the post-Troubles period. We talked with some of you last night about what it might mean to call the conflict here, the war here, the social difficulties here, to call that the Troubles, right? So that's problematic for many people. It might also be problematic to talk about the post-Troubles period as well. Does that suggest conclusion, or does it suggest that we're just simply in a sort of continuing set of circumstances defined by the Troubles? But it might be that in that post-Troubles predicament, maybe contemporary art practice has been a place where a certain kind of dissenting spirit has been possible. And maybe the kind of dissent that's happened within the field of contemporary art has been one which is perhaps not didactic, not dogmatic, not propagandistic, but has been in some ways about perhaps destabilizing some of the certainties of the dominant discourses here. That's maybe been about creating, in a way, making present some of the difficulties which are sometimes buried or hidden within the wider discourse. In the course of the last year, over last year, in Derry, or Derry, Londonderry, or Legendary as it came to be called in a Twitter hashtag last year, there was the City of Culture in 2013, the UK City of Culture, which is a really interesting proposition given the history of that city and the history of Irish and British relationships. So Derry, Londonderry, becomes the UK City of Culture. And this was a fantastic celebratory project, one that gave expression to the vitality of cultural life in that city, and which also allowed things like the Turner Prize, the prize for the most important British art work or artists exhibition of that year to be presented in Derry. So this was an exhibition project very much about declaring optimism about the future of particularly young to mid-career artists and so on. And so there was this as a vital side of the City of Culture project. Perhaps one of the very most important elements of the City of Culture year was Willie Doherty's exhibition Unseen, which was staged in a venue called the City Factory Gallery. And this exhibition Unseen comprised works from different stages of Willie's career, from early work to very, very recent work. And within the optimistic, forward-looking City of Culture project, here were a set of works which, in one way or another, dissented, maybe, in complicated ways, perhaps. Dissented not so much overall with regard to the City of Culture project, but which somehow, as I say, gave expression to hurt, anxiety, difficulty, to that which has been neglected, to that which, as the title indicates, remains unseen in relation to the wider account of progress. These things that are unseen might matter socially. They might be things which are social issues which are not addressed significantly, or it might be that they are things which are repressed somehow psychologically, and the works combine both a social and a psychological tension. We'll look at some examples of work in a moment or two, but I think Unseen, that exhibition, was a landmark moment, and in articulating something about the culture of Derry, Londonderry, or the culture of Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, at that point in time, it was fascinating and rich, and hopefully we can open up some issues around that. One thing that the title calls to mind for me is a line from the writings of the Belgian political theorist Chantal Mouffe. I heard Miguel mention earlier about dissent and antagonism earlier, and of course Mouffe is a theorist of antagonism and of agonism. And Mouffe talks about what a viable critical art might be today, and what a viable critical art might do. And she talks about how the task of critical art today might be to make visible what the dominant consensus tends to obscure and obliterate. Now that seems to resonate in relation to this idea that Willie's work would take an interest in the unseen, but somehow make seen what is unseen. And in doing that, though, that project of making visible isn't an easy one, isn't one which brings to light things that everybody wants to see, that brings to light things that we can easily deal with, but it might be an essential one. So what I want to do is to, beyond these slightly rambling and abstract introductory comments, is to talk with Willie about some particular works, and to start with this work here, which is called Same Difference. One of the things that this work, which we'll talk about in a moment, insists on is a necessity of multiple positions. Operating, as one critic, Caoimhín McGillivray, has said, according to a logic of dual articulation, that we need to be able to occupy multiple positions at once. And of course that echoes in some ways the format of today of, emphasizing a certain kind of dialogue and duality and so on. But maybe rather than talking in depth about that work, and I have sort of quotes and things here, but maybe we don't really need more quotes and so on at this time in the morning. The quotes we need perhaps are from Willie. But maybe the thing to do right away would be to welcome Willie and introduce Willie. Willie, everyone, Willie, and to talk perhaps about the particularity of this work, and then we look at 3 other works and look at short clips of other video and film works that represent different aspects of this making visible project that is crucial to Willie's work, with all the tensions and difficulties and potentials that there are around making visible what the dominant consensus tends to obscure and obliterate, in Mouffe's terms. So Willie.
Good morning, Declan.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure being here, and thanks for the invitation.
Could we start then by talking a little bit about the work, which is one moment from which is behind us, which is Same Difference.
Let me just go back on your slides. This is a work that I made in 1990, and I guess I was kind of provoked to some extent to make this work. And I mean that in the sense of it was in some ways a kind of artist's response to the imposition of what was called the broadcast media ban here. And there was a similar ban that affected the Republic of Ireland as well. The broadcast media ban was imposed by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government in 1989, I think. Really to, as she said at the time, starve the IRA of the oxygen supply of publicity. And effectively what that did was it prohibited the voice of Sinn Féin and a number of other proscribed organisations from the airwaves, so from television and radio broadcasts essentially. But it had another kind of slightly more bizarre effect is in that it created a climate of censorship or kind of self-censorship where, first of all, many broadcasters, so that they wouldn't kind of fall foul of the ban, actually interpreted the ban to, well, more rigorously than it should have been interpreted. And also, it had an impact on the work of artists and writers, where people who may have been working for television or for radio took a more cautious approach, I guess, you know. So this work really was an attempt to kind of look at that and look at the, I suppose, in the context of the debate around which I guess the ban was designed to contribute to or to inhibit in some way, the debate around whether we should negotiate with terrorists. And at that time, the position of the British government was that they would never negotiate with terrorists. And this was a number of years after the hunger strikes, which you referred to. But you know, we now know, with the hindsight of history, that the British government were actually talking with Sinn Féin at the time. But their declared position at that time was that they would never negotiate with terrorists. And it seemed to me that the two ways in which you could understand, or a couple of the ways in which you might understand the decision by someone to become politically engaged through the use of violence or without the use of violence, was the idea of the volunteer. And the IRA, in the context of Ireland, always referred to themselves as volunteers, IRA volunteers. But they were also referred to, oops, wrong one, as murderers in the context of the dialogue around, sorry, I'm messing up here. Where did that go? I just wanted to get the thing off the screen there. In the context of that kind of wider debate around terrorism, the same organisation was described as murderers. Now, whether you agree with that or not is another issue, I suppose. But what this work did was it took the face of this woman, and it was an image that I copied from a television news broadcast. And at the time, she was an IRA volunteer who had been arrested in Holland, where she was charged with the murder of two off-duty British soldiers. Well, that's not entirely true. The two people who were killed were two Australian tourists who this gang had mistaken for off-duty British soldiers. She was eventually acquitted of that charge, but then extradited to Germany, where she faced a number of other charges related to an IRA attack in Germany. So this whole process was going on over a number of years. She was eventually acquitted of all of the charges, but at the time that I made the work, she was in the process of, I think at that time she was in prison in Germany on remand. So the work essentially tries to look at those kind of dual positions, or those kind of opposites, if you want, or the position of the volunteer and the murderer. So what the work does, actually, you can see on the left of the screen there are two slide projectors. one projects the image of the woman's face constantly. The other projector projects, in one sequence, the word murder, interspersed by a number of adjectives. So every second image, or every second slide said murder, and then it was interspersed by a group of words like deranged, mythical, mostly language that I actually had appropriated from media coverage of this story. So there was a kind of hysteria in some ways, or an emotional response, shall we say, to the idea that a woman would be involved in this kind of terrorist activity. It seemed to provoke more interest than if a man had been involved in this. So the second sequence, and well, I suppose I should say something about the structure of the work. I mean, the two projections were positioned diagonally opposite each other in the space, so the same face was projected twice. On the other sequence, the word volunteer was projected over the face, and then every second word was again another bunch of adjectives. If you remember, people who are old enough here and who use slide projectors, you remember that when the slide changes, there is a kind of blank for a second. So that created the effect that the words disappeared and the face you could see the face without the words, and then a new word would appear over the face. So it had this effect of making it look as if the words were literally being kind of imposed on the face for a few seconds and then disappear, and then another word would be imposed on the face. So it was kind of, in some ways, almost kind of violent imposition of language on this person's face.
And that had been something which, of course, without diverting from the narrative too much in a way, that had been something which, just for the general audience, that's something which had been consistent with your work from early on, the almost violent imposition of language onto imagery.
Yeah, I mean, I started making the photographic works that had text imposed on them in around 1985. So this was a few years after that. And it was really through a collaboration with Matt's Gallery in London, where I had been invited to make this show, that I had the opportunity to make an installation, or a kind of time-based work, for the first time. And I guess, you know, that work in relationship with Matt's Gallery, which still continues actually, then led to my working with video actually. So in that sense, it was a kind of significant work. But I mean, I think the return to the broader discussion about dissent. I mean, as I say, I think the work was a kind of response to a provocation, if you want. And I think that, I mean, I'm still interested in that position that you kind of outlined of the artist, somehow having the position, or assuming the position, or taking this position, or even having the responsibility to voice dissent. And that's something that has particularly interested me in the context of post-conflict Northern Ireland, particularly since the Belfast Agreement or the Good Friday Agreement. And again, there's no clear agreement on what the agreement can be called, you know.
Yeah. This is, for those of you new to Northern Ireland, you'll find that there's more or less two words for everything.
For everything.
You know, and we always have to somehow kind of occupy a place, either in allegiance with one or in relation to another. And this is, of course, a difficulty, but it's also it's a subject of same difference here.
Yeah.
And it's also in a way partly the predicament of the later work, Rerun, which comes within this sort of post-troubles or post-conflict moment.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. And I think one of the things that kind of interested me as an artist about the post-conflict world, if you want, was it somehow, which has got to do with consensus again? I mean, part of the overall consensus that we had kind of signed up to or agreed to was that we would move forward. So moving forward has been understood to mean not looking at the past, not dealing with the past. And in fact, that's something that continues to be a problem here. I mean, before Christmas, we had the attempt by the American diplomat Richard Haas to broker a kind of deal or an understanding about how we might progress here in terms of dealing with the past and dealing with some of the other contentious issues around flags and parades. But again, I mean, as an artist, to be told that, you know, you shouldn't look at the past, that you should kind of happily move forward, again, seems to me a kind of provocation, you know.
And in something like Rerun, which we can take a glance at in a moment, that there is this dual movement. It isn't quite dual articulation in this instance, it's a dual motion, where again there's an almost sculptural dimension to it through it's presented in space, or it was initially presented in space in a particular way, which placed you between different situations of motion.
Well, in that sense, I mean, it's not unrelated to Same Difference, in the way that Same Difference placed the viewer literally between two screens, where you had to look at, try to look at both positions simultaneously, but because of the nature of how they were positioned, that was difficult.
You can't stand neutrally and observe the two positions. You somehow have to negotiate them.
Rerun played with the same spatial configuration. The work was shot on a bridge in Derry called Craigavon Bridge, which at the time was it's the main kind of bridge that links the west bank of the River Foyle and the east bank of the River Foyle, which are, I guess, you know, in the most kind of basic way, and again, this, you know, really doesn't fully acknowledge the complexities of the situation, but in the most basic way, it separates the Catholic, nationalist, Republican side of the city from the Protestant, loyalist or unionist side of the city. But also it connects and divides the small part of the north of Ireland that is across the river from the rest of the north of Ireland. I mean, if you look at the map, you can see that a small section, when the border was drawn, there was a small section to the west of the River Foyle that was retained as part of Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, whereas in fact, if you look logically, if you're going to make a border, you would make it where the river goes, but because of the historical, cultural and political importance of some of the, and symbolic importance of some of the buildings, and particularly the walls on that little side of the river, this section was retained as part of the north of Ireland as well. So in a way, the bridge it's symbolically significant in terms of how people not just use the city in terms of going from A to B, but how they think about the city, how they imagine the city, and how they, in some ways, kind of dream about the city. So I guess the work is really about that aspect of it, the kind of imaginary life of a city.
And it has I'll just play it there. I mean, it has a dreamlike or nightmarish quality to it, in the this intense anxiety of someone who runs towards us, and then, as we also stand in the space, perhaps runs away from us as the viewer positioned between them.
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind the particular type of character and the particular scenario that you had envisaged for this work?
Well, I mean, I guess it's something that I'd always kind of thought about. I mean, walking across the bridge late at night, I think everyone kind of shared a moment of anxiety if you were on your own, hoping that you wouldn't meet someone coming from the other direction. So it's really about that kind of nightmarish sense of being chased, if you want. I mean, in a broader sense, I mean, the work attempts to deal with, I suppose, and this is something that runs through a lot of the work that I make, to deal with the specific, but also deal with the kind of generic, like a more kind of general sense of anxiety. So, I mean, it's not important that the viewer knows the kind of potted history of this bridge and the kind of the north of Ireland. I mean, hopefully there's something else at play in the work that articulates that sense of anxiety to the viewer in a different kind of way. So that's a concern for me as an artist. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I remember reading about this work was Karl and Christoph Bakargiev had said that your work had developed a kind of existential intensity that was in a way, of course, related to the predicament of the Troubles and post-Troubles in Northern Ireland, but it did have this wider set of possibilities and readings. And interestingly, one of the other things that we can take account of here is a moment in your work where you have gone beyond Northern Ireland and dealt with some issues to do with the past and things that are unseen and so on. Yeah. And again with Karl and Christoph Bakargiev in the documentary work that again Miguel referred to. Maybe you could say something about the way in which your work. We'll play this clip in a moment or two, but the way in which your work has both been specific to Northern Ireland and moved beyond that context, addressing or engaging with other situations.
Well, I mean, I think that is something that I guess had to engage with as an artist who luckily had the opportunity to show the work outside of Northern Ireland. So, I had an audience beyond this place. And when I look back at some of the early work that I made in the mid-1980s, it seems, when I look at it now, that it demands a certain kind of knowledge from the viewer, a knowledge that you could maybe describe as kind of insider knowledge, that there is a kind of demand on the viewer to know something of the politics and the history of this place. So I think I understood that more clearly when I started to exhibit that work abroad. So in some ways the work has evolved and changed in response to the idea of or the desire to kind of articulate itself more clearly to different kinds of audiences in different places. So, I mean, it's very generous of Carolyn to kind of describe it in those terms. For me, it kind of felt more pragmatic, but I certainly was conscious that I needed to kind of make the work have the potential to have a life outside of Derry and outside of Northern Ireland. How are we doing for time, by the way, Miguel? We're okay. So, because it'd be nice to be able to show the two clips. Yeah. That the particular work that was made for Documented Secretion evolved in relation to a landscape, and you often work, by paying great attention to particular settings and letting the work in a way arise out of the landscape. Yeah, I mean that's really been central to what I do, whether it's through the video work or the photographic work that I've made in Derry. I mean, in some ways, you could understand it as being a kind of examination of landscape. So I think it's possible to kind of look at the work within the context of a tradition of artists making work about the landscape. So when I was invited to participate in Documenta, all of the artists were invited to come and visit Castle, and Carolyn took all of the artists to see a number of places, including the former monastery at Brighton, which is a small town about 15 kilometres south of Castle, which was one of the numerous sites throughout Germany that had been used as a kind of, not concentration camp as we kind of know it in the other sense, but as a kind of labour camp or kind of work camp, where enforced labour was used throughout the war. And there were many of these throughout Germany, so you really became aware of the extent of that whole kind of operation, if you want. But I think what Carolyn was doing was she was asking all of the artists to consider that history, consider that past, consider Castle's relationship with that, and by implication Castle's involvement, if you want, through Brighton now, as something that artists could choose to think about or not in their response to the work for Documenta. Some artists did take that on, other people chose not to, but I became interested in well, I declared right at the start that I wanted to make it work there and to kind of make it work in the landscape. So that's eventually what I did. I found a number of locations in and around Castle, and I made the work there. So you can show a clip.
Take a look at it.
Yeah.
I don't know if the lights can come.
The trees started dying. Some trees died completely and were colonized by many species of fungus. Some lost their leaves in the autumn as normal, but they never returned, and the trees have remained suspended in a permanent winter. All of the known diseases that attack a wide variety of trees were investigated and eliminated. Tests were conducted for new varieties of Dutch elm and more exotic organisms and bacterial infections. The scientists could not understand the source of the disease or how it had spread so ruthlessly across such a wide area. It didn't make sense. They had never seen anything like it before. Even now, after such a long time, it cannot be fully explained. It took many years before anyone understood the nature of the disorder and its source. The initial hotspots appeared to be random and unconnected. The first clues emerged when the pattern of contamination seemed to match the network of rivers and canals that covered the whole country. There were no visible signs of pollution in the water, but the first trees to succumb to the disorder were those close to rivers and other waterways.
It's a continuing trope, I guess, in your recent work, the idea of the landscape being corrupted or despoiled in some way. The presence of the past has somehow created this hidden infection.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's so when this work was, as I say, made in response to an invitation to make something in Castle, I don't feel it's inconsistent with the body of work that I've been kind of making up to that point and since then. So it kind of fits in with what I'd been working on just immediately before that. So I mean, works like Ghost Story and Buried, for example, which in their own way also looked at ideas of the past here and that the issue of forgetting. I mean, I'm kind of interested in that kind of relationship with landscape, because I remember reading something, I think it was in Susan McKay's book, Bear in Mind These Dead. And this was part of an interview she did with the relative of a victim of the violence here, and the person saying that it was difficult to kind of drive through the landscape of Northern Ireland because even just seeing the names of places on road signs brought back the trauma of the past. And I think that's, I mean, if you're going to visit Derry later today and you get a chance to kind of walk around and possibly you've had that experience in Belfast as well, that kind of sense of history being kind of overwritten on the landscape, that it's hard to see the landscape as a kind of neutral space.
And your work often takes this continuing, returning, forensic look at the landscape. I'm not sure is this. Yeah,
I mean, I am kind of interested in, and I think this work kind of does that. You can see that in that kind of opening sequence where the camera is tracking very, very slowly through this landscape. I mean, essentially what I'm kind of inviting the viewer to do then is to kind of look at the landscape and look at the kind of details. So this work is full of lots of kind of small details of the landscape, which is kind of, on the one hand, offered up as kind of evidence, and on the other hand, there's nothing there. There's nothing to be kind of disclosed in this evidence, which is where the voiceover really kind of kicks in the work.
And because I'm conscious that we have limited time left, that does in a way bring us back to the Unseen exhibition in Derry and to the landscape of Derry and to a particular work which does similar things in Derry, looks again at the landscape and attempts to tell stories about the hidden trauma of the past.
I mean, I think that the idea of storytelling is one that has become kind of increasingly kind of important in the work, and possibly through the kind of relationship of video and histories of kind of cinema and also of thinking about this place and another kind of history of storytelling.
And in this work remains, there are 3 stories which relate to the ongoing problem of punishment, beatings, and attacks and shootings in the north. And perhaps we could just we'll watch this little clip and then maybe have a word or two, and then we can move on.
The second time, 1982. facing the wall. The smell of damp moss, burnt rubber. 18. Breathless, alone, trembling, guilty of something unspecified. Still don't know. The wrong something or other. Wrong place, wrong time. Wrong face. Answering back. Ye shalt not. The rules had been broken. Wrestled to the ground, face in the dirt, a foot in the back, ankles pinned down. The cold, dark metal. The soft tissue. The entrance wound. The kneecap. The exit wound. Low velocity, he said. Next time you won't be so lucky. Compulsive repetition. I can't remember. I can't forget.
So
Okay.
there's always more stories, there's always more information, there's never enough time. But I think it's been really interesting to be able to say this much so far, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity for people to ask some questions at some stage. So, but for me anyway, if I could thank you, Willie, very much for
Thank you,
for
Declan.
talking with me and with everybody. So, that's us for now. So, thank you.
Thank you.
In fact, we'll continue with Ihab, and I think it's better to leave the discussion to the end or after, otherwise. So, yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Can I see?
Yeah, just on. Yeah. Be careful with the computer.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I want to thank Miguel and the organization for inviting me here. Just to clarify and to continue with the discussion where there were actually so many terms and concepts that you brought up that I will be reflecting on. But just to start with a small note, Miguel introduced me as Palestinian, coming from Palestine, I think you understood. I was born in the biggest refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, so I am Palestinian, but I'm here as a Dutch academic. So just to clarify this. And most importantly, as a Dutch taxpayer. Because in Holland we care so much about taxes, as you know. And today I would like to just to sketch with you or to go through with you on a concept that I have been recently working on in my research on the politics of competing memories. And today I would like to talk about the notion of representation, which we haven't actually solved since Aristotle, in fact. And also the notion of performance and the performance of the we, let's say, or the collective of conflicting and conflicted narratives and voices at the same time. And I would like to take, I will be talking in general about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but I will take you through a detour. So I will start my talk about Palestine and Israel from actually Bosnia and Europe. And actually an encounter with a curator. It's not working. All right. Yeah, this should do it. And actually, one of the research projects that I'm working on at the moment is called deals with terrorscapes, so European terrorscapes. Moving from First World War to Second World War and up till the present. So, and we did some tours from Auschwitz to different death camps, etc. And one of our visits took us to Markovica Kozara Park, that's in Republika Srpska. And I would like to show you just a small fragment of my encounter with a curator, with somebody like your profession. And then I'll build up the argument there. One of the points that came into the discussion had to deal with this image. Okay. So we went into this Yazinovac Kozar Memorial together with a research group. This is the museum. Why there is no sound?
Just play it here.
Right. And this is, let's say, is their permanent exhibition.
Spomenik i ove betonske kolone ispred iza spomenika, oni su jedna cijelina. Te betonske kolone ispred njega predstavljaju neprijateljske jedinice, oni su nemačke istočne jedinice koje su za vrijeme ofenzive 1942. godine držale sav narod sa Kozare Vikstele, Lerova Kozare ovdje u Kozari betonske kolone su neprijateljske jedinice, a sam spomenik predstavlja simboliše taj narod. Spomenik je visok 33,5 metra i ta visina spomenika zapravo simboliše snagu toga naroda koji se izdigao iznad svojih mogućnosti u želje odbrane samogodišnju. I treći dio memorijalne zone je muzej u kojem se nalazi postavka posvećena upravo toj ofenzivi koja dokumentima i slikama može na najbolji način sama svedoči o tome šta se to zapravo. If you have some questions, you can ask me. That is pretty much it. In short version, of course.
I have. What's this photo? What's that?
Hitler i El-Husseini. El-Husseini je jerusalimski muftija. Mada on nikad...
Muftija, ja,
It's Imam from
from Jerusalem.
main Imam.
Yes. Mada...
Yes. He was a founder of this SS Hanjar division, which was
This El-Husseini.
Okay.
which she says was one of the most brutal divisions in the army, even with some of their in some of their actions more brutal than Germans.
It's local fascist.
Who? Al-Husseini or Hitler?
El-Husseini.
Okay, do you have documentation about this? Where do you
Do we
come up
have
with this
documentation
story?
about this?
Yes. Why the museum is having this picture here?
So why not?
Because actually this is all, this is a huge part of the, let's say, the Zionist propaganda approving the anti-Semitic. It was, this meeting was, many people wrote about it, that actually
Yes.
it's part of the whole systematic Zionist, let's say, propaganda to prove that the Palestinians are anti-Semitic, you see.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't think it is.
Okay. Okay, as you see, I am the ignorant audience in this case.
No, not that one.
Oh, not this one?
No.
Where is this
No,
one? Yeah. Okay. But as you see, the museum, with all this Yugoslavian history, as we know, and the Bosnia conflict and the ethnic conflict in the Balkans, very similar to what we're dealing with here in Ireland and Palestine and many other conflicts around the world. However, what was remarkable about this exhibition for an ignorant audience such as myself is that this picture was almost the center of attention in the exhibition. The curator or the museum itself did not have enough information about the background. I understand that they are showing this from their own history and for their people, so there's a particular context for this museum. However, my question was, almost as you see, there was no information available about it in English for international audience. That's the first thing. And secondly, the museum itself, the curator, the people who are promoting this kind of museum, did not have enough information about the, let's say, the global context of the issue. Because this picture is simply showing the Imam al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, on one of his visits to Germany, as we know with Hitler, with his meetings. And this whole discussion, if you go through the historical documents or historical scholarship, it has been discussed often by Jeffrey Herf, etc. But basically the main point here is that this was used as a kind of argument of the Zionist, let's say, machinery or the Zionist regime, is basically to prove that, well, the first thing is that you have the Muslim element siding up with the Nazis, and the second, it gets worse when you know that this person is Palestinian. So there you have it. So it's a kind of legitimization of the whole Israeli conquest of the land, you see? So basically, because they are anti-Semitic, we have a right to occupy them, etc. Another thing that I want to share with you is another map that was just recently made by Zohorot, an Israeli NGO, very active in this kind of conflict area. And it actually, this is the first Israeli map of the Nakba map. So actually it covers all the 680 villages or localities that were destroyed in 1948, Palestinian villages. And this is the first documentation in Hebrew to raise awareness of that kind of history within Israeli society. Now, this is significant on different levels in terms of landscaping, but also in terms of mapping, mental mapping, etc. But before I go into that, I would like to, as a memory scholar, just to give you a few thoughts in order to build up the argument afterwards. Now, as we all know, when studying cultural memory, in general, the idea is to deconstruct stable notions of identity which have been used for political or social purposes. In other words, the task here is to show how memory, identity, heritage are constantly negotiated and reconstructed and reconfigured. With regard to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but also to conflict in general, certain issues become focused and come to the fore. The first one is that what is absent or what is lost, as well as the question of victimization and injustice, and how somebody asserts its own memory on the account of others or deprive others from it, these issues become central in this kind of conflict areas and conflict zones. In other words, historical winners of history, they need to construct memory and heritage, taken for granted. That's the right, because they are winners. But what happens in the process? And that remains the central question. So what happens when I win over the history of others, when I'm a historical winner, and I construct my own history and my own heritage? What happens in the process? Indeed, different modes of memory, as we all know, memory activities become popular or unpopular, such as film, heritage sites, contemporary festivals, etc. Yet, just assuredly, the changes are not completely random. For example, there's, at the moment, with regard to individual politics and individual memory, there's an increased, this kind of scholarship, there's an increased emphasis on individuals as both the originators and the disseminators of culture and politics. Scholars, both in the humanities and social sciences, increasingly sought to interrogate the ways in which individual memory or local politics contribute to the maintenance and the reproductions of traditional cultures. In this regard, recent research investigations of the interplay of social and cultural elements through the vehicle of narrative, of course, call for a reinvigoration of the concepts of collective creation of traditional material, including historical remembrances. Now, my research has been always involved in this kind of relationship between memory and narrative in the tradition of Walter Benjamin, Hayden White, and cultural theory in general, on the levels ranging from literary to broadly cultural. So I don't dare to say I'm an artist. I teach art theory and I teach museum theory, but I'm not an artist. The definition is always a troubling, just like saying where's home. Both the landscapes in this kind of work, what I do, is inscribed, both the landscape as inscribed memory and the experience of cultural loss feature strongly in my work. Now, loss is very important in my work, but in this context takes two forms. First, I examine the erasure of geographical touchstone of social memory, a procedure that potentially inhibits the functioning of social memory. In a second context, I point not to the loss of memory, but to the collective memory of loss, embedded in cultural artifacts, practices as the route for present and future generations, in order to share remembrances of the past. Now, this kind of memory, or this type of memory, always toys with the traditional and the official, with the real and the fictional, exactly like what you have here. So you have an NGO presenting the map of Israel, or the map of Palestine, with the destroyed villages of Palestine. But you go into the ministry website, for example, the Israeli ministry website, you will have a completely different mapping of that context. Now, key questions that I would like to raise here. So this is a map, another map that I want to share with you, and that's a map of my hometown. So we see I was born in Gaza, but every Palestinian was born somewhere, but they come from somewhere else. That's when Miguel introduced me as Palestinian. I always have problem with that. Because my family comes from Asqalan, so Ashkelon. That's the city. Now, if you look at this map, this is the official map, what you find at the Foreign Affairs Tourist Guide mapping. Please take a closer look at the landscape here, or how it is division, because I'm about to show you another map that is handmade by people who were displaced, by Palestinian refugees who have never been back into that city, and who, after decades of exile and displacement in the Gaza Strip, they came up with their own map. And this map, the difference between the two maps, here you have like Mejdal, all these big zones, or here in this map, if you read Arabic, we go by family. So we have the neighborhood of Talsa, the neighborhood of Saloul, the neighborhood of Shakura, etc., etc., etc. So this is how the design. But if you notice, the design is very similar to the official map. And this what we call a memory map. So this was drawn from memory. These people have never seen it after 1948, have seen the city after 48, but they drew it decades after that. Now, this is the picture of the city in 1948. This is the main square in Asqalan. I have never been there. I was there in passing one time only. Because as people from Gaza, as you know, we are very different people. We are very special people, not because we are special, we are made special. We're not like West Bankers, we're not like other Palestinians, let's say. But our movement, if you have a Gaza ID, is like the worst case that you can ever have. Because you can't go anywhere. You're always restricted in your movement, much more than other Palestinians. Now, my work, this is some of the things that I have published on, and I worked on this concept. This is my book, Telling Memories. I dealt with the cultural memory of a Nakba, or 1948, and its significance to modern Palestinian imagination. My work deals with methodology as well, interdisciplinary methodology between close narrative, culture, and discursive analysis of literature, films, and personal narratives. And my work deals with memory, identity, nostalgia, trauma, all these concepts. Most importantly is that what I try to do through my scholarly work, and I'm not a politician, so please don't ask me anything about politics, a solution. If you want a solution from me, I don't have that for you. I am a scholar. I'm a cultural analyst, let's say, or cultural theorist. However, through my scholarly work, I always try to offer, or I think one of the most amazing arguments that come from Palestinian culture is the notion of the preservation of cultural optimism in the face of ongoing catastrophe. And the second one is that within Palestinian popular culture, I'm sure just like Belfast and the Northern Ireland case, aesthetics and politics intersect. There is a close intersection in contemporary culture. So almost everything we do is about politics. Some of the works I analyzed, like Ghassan Kanafani's works, Men in the Sun, the story of Palestinian refugees who were denied, who were displaced, and then they end up they go and search for a new life in Kuwait in the desert, and they end up dying in a closed water tank. This is a fascinating story, one of the most classical stories in Palestinian literature, Ghassan Kanafani, Men in the Sun. Abu Qais, these are the Palestinians who are being smuggled, and that's your worst Palestinian friend, that guy. That's their smuggler, the one who smuggles them. He's also a Palestinian, but he's castrated Palestinian. So he lost his manhood when he was fighting in 1948, and all he cares about now is money. He takes them on the journey. That's when he finds them dead in the tank, the water tank, across the border. And as you see, modernity is just right at the edge. And this is how they end up. This is how Palestinians in exile, and how exile is terrible, and how the experience of exile is portrayed in Palestinian consciousness. This is your end. You end up on the garbage heap. Everything ends up on the garbage heap. The story, the bodies, everything. And notice there the performative gesture in his hand. This is a movie by Tawfiq Saleh, 1972, by the way, an Egyptian one of the classical movies. And his hand as if is on the trigger. Yeah, so this is the resistance. This is the 1960s, the 70s. This is where the association with Palestinian flags or IRA, Republicans, all these histories come from. Another work was by Muhammad Bakri, for example. This is Saleh, for example. That's her home. And this is the closest she can get to her home. That's the Israeli flag for you, taken over the house. And this is her grandson. So this is the generational transmission of memory, if you like, how memory is being transmitted. You will find in these works also Zionists who will never say that they are not Zionists, but Zionists who are being, let's say, they feel the guilt from inside. So they are, and they will tell you, you won't find that in official history books, such as Amos Kenyan, Abu Adil, who meets David and his son who took over his house. And then you find other Zionists like Doherty, who all they can do is to sing for children. And it's funny what he's bringing to them. We bring you peace. It's a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful line to show how, how somebody can bring peace to other people. So you talked about the peace process. I will say a few things about it in a minute. But I think this is, what the, where the paradigm of peace or peace process is being brought to us. We need somebody to bring us peace, yeah? And that falls into the colonial paradigm again. Ongoing memory and storytelling. This is some characteristics of Palestinian memory. It's always about making sense of a traumatic event from the past. There is an emphatic attempt to give shape to uncertain condition of displacement and cultural erasure, and the long duration of a Nakba. 1948 is not important. My Nakba is not in 1948. It's happening now, as I speak now. So this is the ongoingness of the catastrophe, if you like. With regard to home and exile and to Ahlam's work, also she will elaborate on this, but these are some theoretical points. The notion of exile is basically, we can assume it as the notion of the not home. There's a move from nostalgic memory in exile to critical memory of the immediate experience of the denial of home. So it's not about home as fixed origin or essentialist place, where, no, it's about home becomes actually materialized at the moment that we are denied access to it. So that's why it becomes home. Denial of home as a storehouse of memories, where a sense of self is being constructed. Excuse me. Home as a cultural space that is also personal, filial, and ideological all at once. The subject is continuously desires to travel to this place, but is continuously denied access to it. So it's really about the accessibility of home. It's not about the materiality of home, but the accessibility of it. A denial of home as a reflective construct that foregrounds the subject's view and meaning of the homeland. So you see, if the Israelis would let me go to Asqalan, I don't care whatever they call that land. They can call it the biggest Jewish empire or the Roman Empire in the world, I don't care. So that's when it becomes a homeland. You see, so it's about the accessibility. It's basically that the denial of home that foregrounds the subject's meanings and view of the homeland. What is a homeland? Not vice versa. A small fragment I will show with you in a minute from Gaza Strip. Some of my research field work which I did in Gaza Strip. But before that, I would like to go back to the notion of the museums and what I started with, and why why it is important to deal with these questions. Just to conclude. So the idea is that we need to ask ourselves as artists or as curators or as creative people or as theorists, what happens when the activity of remembrance and telling is fragmented in a case of historical disaster? And I constantly plea in my work for a need. We are actually very much today in need of an analytical move from, let's say, the aestheticism of performance as theater to the performativity of aesthetics as political activism, as the remembrance needed for that activism. Such a move, if we, is very productive and can help us to, or enable us to connect aesthetic representation of catastrophes or of conflict to the ways this event or these events continue to be lived and make an impact on the lives, identity, and agency of Palestinians in the present. It's about actuality. How art can be actual. So it's actually what I'm talking about here is a methodological question. Just think in terms of the disciplines, history and art history, and how these disciplines are in fact complicit disciplines in this kind of work. Just an example of, just think of what you hear about when you hear people talking about ethnographic museums. Just take a case study of that and see where that takes you. In any case, I think the challenge is to ask the question, how can museums, how can cultural and aesthetic practices access hidden memories, and how even can unclear can representation be, just like the case of Khuzar. Now, to finally say something about the peace process and to go back to this notion of, because we are in Belfast and this is my first time in Belfast, wonderful place. If political history of the peace process, whether in the Middle East or in Belfast, I dare to say, I don't know much, I'm a stranger, so you should tell me, shows anything, then it shows that peace does not necessarily lead to justice. Moreover, these events illustrate the ways in which one culture emerges from the ashes of another. New Israeli consciousness, and now I'm talking about the Israelis, so I have nothing to do with the Irish. New Israeli consciousness is based on both the erasure of Palestinian physical presence as well as their culture. In any case, in other words, what I'm saying is that the national, what we can call the national geo-body, so to speak, becomes not merely a space or territory. So it's not about landscape or material territory, but it becomes a component of daily life. It's being made and remade continuously in small moments. With regard to aesthetics and cultural memory, this kind of insight becomes crucial because it alerts us to how art, or how can art create spaces that could challenge not simply political realities, but also the viewer. So it's, this is the whole discussion of political art. Political art is not necessarily determined by the subject about politics. No, it's about by its ability to trigger a thought, to challenge the viewer's thinking. In other case, the rejection of passive audience or non-thinking audience. That's why there is a need to challenge, renegotiate cultural practices, and to continuously do so. With regard to memory, also another notion that comes to the fore has to do with what we call the case of cultural erasure. The Palestinian-Israeli case is definitely a case of cultural erasure, but more importantly is one of claiming ownership over the cultural heritage and memory rather than totally obliterating it. You see, the Israelis, that's where the systematic occupation becomes. It's not about, it would have been much easier for the Israelis to nuclear bomb, take us all out, and then we're done. No, but they didn't do it this way. It's not about cultural erasure completely, but it's also about claiming ownership. You see, the hummus, what we ate yesterday, I don't know who was eating hummus, and falafel, like typical Israeli food. Falafel and hummus. So they're not just stealing our land, but they're stealing our food and clothes and underwears, everything. It's wonderful because it means we have a taste. but also one of claiming, so obliteration here becomes by claiming ownership, if you like. Finally, two things in this kind of discussion that we have to be aware of. That the first thing is that memory is important, but it also blinds and informs at the same time. So memory is a dangerous weapon because it blinds and informs. And the second aspect that we need to keep in mind is in this kind of context and discussion is that without recognition of the suffering of others, there can be no forgetting. Because you see, we are working on memory in order to forget. It's not we want to remember. Everybody's working towards how can we forget and move on. So actually everybody wants to move forward, but that's the problem, that we are stuck in that past. Without recognizing each other's suffering, it is very difficult to achieve that moment. I would refer you to Susan Sontag's classical works and theories with that regard. Maybe the challenge in this case and the most productive thing about competing memories and conflicting voices is the awareness of the difficulties of coming to terms with historical justice. That is still ongoing. Occupation or military occupation, in other words, is not limited to sovereignty over space, but it reaches its full potential in its sovereignty over culture, both its erasure or revival. Military force, as we know, never operates in isolation. This is why perhaps we do not need to waste any more time looking for shared narratives. We simply don't have them, and we will never have them. So you can never have a shared narrative, a Palestinian-Israeli shared narrative. You can never have that. So don't waste time on that. Instead, art needs to invest in creating a shared space for conflicted and competing narratives and memory, just like what your Congress is doing here, I think. In any case, I think what I'm saying is that we need to rethink these notions with regard to the principle of art or museum practices and how they can participate in social and historical justice. I will close with a small fragment just to show you how generational memory continues and how that takes place in the Palestinian context. This is my refugee camp. This is my home, my refugee camp, Gaza.
زي أي شعب في الكرة الأرضية ما كانش لسه في تطور، يعني قرية يعيشون على الزراعة والفلاحة وتربية الحيوانات، حياة بسيطة جدا، أبسط ممكن، حياة ممتعة، فيش مشاكل، ما فيش جوع، لأنه الإنتاج بيزيد عن حاجز الناس، كانوا عايشين كويس متحاببين وما فيش مشاكل وما فيش خوف. يعني لما أنت بتقارن الحياة الآن والحياة زمان قبل ما يصير مشاكل، ما فيش يعني وجه مقارنة.
كيف لاحظت حالك تغيرت من قبل لبعد؟
علشان واحدة خطوة خطوة، ما كانش مفاجأة كبيرة، واللي كان يخفف الأمل. وبدي أقول لك حاجة أنا، نقطة مهمة. اليهود كانوا ساكنين في فلسطين قبل 2000 سنة، لكن اليهودي لما كان يلاقي يهودي على مدى 2000 سنة يسلم عليه ويقول له محار بيروشلايم، بكرة إن شاء الله في القدس. هذا الأمل أمامه بتتضاءل كل المشاكل. اليهود كانوا براهنوا على نقطتين، إنه الجيل الكبير بيموت والجيل الصغير بنسى وخلاص تنتهي المشكلة. اليوم ولا واحد من الجيل اللي حضر، اللي شاف حلاوة البلد وحلاوة الملك والاستقرار، ولا واحد حزم وراح يستكشف. اللي استشهدوا اللي بدهم ينسوا، اللي كانوا يقولوا إنه هذا الجيل الصغير بنسى. فالأمل الشعب يقول ما أضيق العيش لولا فسحة الأمل.
Okay. And this is the politics of hope that I would like to stop with. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Ahlam Shibli. I'm an artist, and I'm a woman, as my psychologist said, if I'm sure about that. Yes, I am. And I'm dealing with the issue in my artwork with the notion of home. My medium is photography, and it can be called obsession. I have an obsession with questioning what does it mean to have a home, who gives the right to be at home, what is the price that one person or another will pay for the home, what the circumstances of denying the right of home, losing home, the price to have a home, losing it in order to have the house. So in 2002, 2003, I started with the question of when one situation changed a political situation changed the home to become a house, destroying the home. It's with the Palestinians who live in south of Palestine, which occupied by Israel since 1948. And as we, the Palestinians, know that our conflict and the occupation we are underneath, it's about the land issue. So the Palestinian in the Naqab, in the foreigner language, it's called Negev. In the local language, it's Naqab. People were denied the right to live in their lands. So the Israeli state will make actions to steal the lands of people and remove again and again the people and establish them in 7 townships that Israel supposedly built for the Palestinian. What I noticed there that people who accepted to leave their lands and to move these townships, they moved to what I saw called house. And the people that they refused this location, they lived in what I saw and what I called a home. So you allowed me to show you some images of this work. Okay. I call the word goter, and it's the word that's used by the local people, and it came from the English word go there, and it used to be used by the British Army during the British colonization of Palestine before 48. There's two stories. One story saying that the British soldiers used to use this word for the shepherd, to tell them to move away from the area of the British camps, because of course, if there's a camp, there's a water. If there's a water, there's a grass. Then the shepherd will come with their animals to the area, and of course, the soldiers wouldn't allow the local people to get close. The other stories, it's the permission of work and movement, because also during the British colonization, the Palestinians were lacking the right of movement and to go to work from a place to another. So people will have a permission, and the soldier will use the word go there to this line or that line to whom have a permission and can move to another place for work. And the people use it. The people made it goter, which go there, and it's have the same meaning, go there. Sorry, I just say a word here with this an image. It's the meaning of taking land. It's also controlling the water. So the concrete things in the first level of the image, it's a water well that the army blocked with the concrete, so people cannot access to their own water. And each water well blocked with the concrete will have a number and then single letter for the use of the army of locating and mapping these waters. Sorry for the microphone. And this image, or the image, the place, Etnan, and this is the other things with the names that I give. So with the titles, I refer to the name of the place. In this village, Etnan, which is unrecognized by Israel, the yard of the football, it's the land given by a local person, and this is where I find it exists in the so-called unrecognized villages, unrecognized, of course, by the Israeli state, and the person will afford to give a land to the to his or her community in this town, in these unrecognized places, and that's exactly where I refer it to a home, that the person feel belong, so give the land for the community. And this case will not happen in these 7 townships where the people living in the so-called house. So all the names, Qasr al-Sir before Etnan, it's the names that known for the people, and it's the name of the lands. And here I don't very much agree with you, Ihab, about the name of families. The people, they don't give name of the families to the lands. The lands had its own name. And in the map you showed, there is the name of the families, and it has another function. In the map you showed, the people give the name of the land in order to give it the recognition of belonging, that this land belonged to that family. And the mapping land of places will have the name place and not the family place. And it's exactly what Israel is doing. Israel is giving the family name to the land. So when Israel moving a family from one place to another place, then the name move with the family. which is not the case if the name it's the place. The name of the place doesn't move. This is one thing. So the second thing, if Israel renamed the place with the name of the family, then the people lose the right of the land, because their papers show a different name than the name that Israel recognized. I don't know if this is easy to understand. It's our complicity of situation. Yes. This is an image symbolic again for me for the house. Where actually the people lost their home, and what is the distance that I am as a photographer, as an artist, building between me and what I am photographing, and what do I'm allowed to show in order not to re-victimize what I am photographing. In this symbol in this example, the use of the paper, of covering the face and creating this blocking path between me and whom I am photographing, and even the bottle of the tea, the glasses, all these objects, it's to separate, and I'm using it not to again victimize the victims. Victimized by me as a photographer, of course. Again, to use this cloth to block seeing what is denied the right to be seen, because these people denied the right to stay in their lands, to have a home. So do we allowed? Do I want to allow to see these people again? And here, with full attention, I choose to photograph this family, the couple with their daughter. It's exactly because this family choose to keep the home and to build the home, which is in reality it's not exist. It's unrecognized. The house look very nice, very beautiful. So there's a feeling of belonging. But if you go outside, it's made from zinc, from material. It's a shake. So. It's not really a building, and they cannot build the people there. But since they feel belonging, so they invest with their money to exercise their feeling and what they see in the place where they live. So through my photograph, what I'm interested to, it's to open my eyes to see what is there and what is denied the right to be there. And this is what I practice in this work, Gotter, and the question that I raised there, that where is there's a home, there is no house, and where there's a house, there's no home. Because with the house, it's actually Israel allowed to build a concrete house, but then the people lost the feeling of home. In 2005, I did a work, it's called The Trackers. Trackers, it's a work about the need to build a house and what is the price of building this house. So it's about Palestinians who volunteer in the Israeli army, and for that they receive a discount to build a house. So in order that I can build a house, I have to destroy the homeland, because actually to join the enemy's army, it's against my own people, about the Palestinian, because these volunteers, they will be in the frontier of the Israeli groups in the border with Lebanon, with Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, to trace tracking of Fida'i. Fida'i, it's Palestinian resistance, armed resistance who enter from the exile to fight Israelis and using weapons. And of course, in the West Bank and in Gaza. So these people, of course, the soldiers, they are called traitors among themselves and among the Palestinians. But they are doing this act of joining the Israeli army in order to be able to build a house. So you allowed me to show you some images. Of course, I'm not interested in this machoism of the army and the militant issue. What interested me to deal with this issue, it's this fact of the need to build a house and how far one will go in order to achieve this goal. And this is why the decision from the beginning for myself was to choose the ones who just joined the army, so-called clean from the machoism, if it's possible. And again, which I'm very much interested in, it's this situation of a lab. And again, I'm looking at of course, and absolutely very clear for me, I don't know if this guy's doing correct or wrong. And even more than that, I really cannot judge them. I can understand, and I'm curious to understand and to look at the condition that brought a human being to this situation, the socio-political situation. And the relation between homeland, the hegemonic power and power of controlling, of narrative, of even belonging, because what actually these soldiers want, also they want to belong to the hegemony. I can understand, actually, is it really correct that I am with the weak side? Is there an option to open a door to belong to the hegemony? I'm curious to look at all these effects in the notion of home. So we keep. So yes, I took these young guys that just joined the army, and for 3 months they have to train using all different kinds of weapons. So this guy, he's almost, I can feel he's shaking in the image. He was shaking when I was there, because it's first time in his life he's carrying, how you call them? Grenades. And he have to walk something like 5 minutes, carrying in them to go on top of a hill that has a huge hole, and test how to throw them and the effect. And you allowed me to go back to this image. Here they are learning what's the effect of each shooting, different bullet. So the ones in the middle with the sacks, it's the ones that the army use a lot in the Palestinian territory, where the bullet inside the body has to damage as much as possible elements inside the body, etc. And so, if they are joining to the Israeli army, the enemy army, to build the house, how the house look like? So this is the house. It's, of course, a copy of the, as Frantz Fanon had showed us with his writing of black, white mask, black skin, about the other side. So the house have to look like the soldier's Jewish Israeli officer. So it's a copy of. It can be that also the soldier will ask his Israeli officer to give him the architectural map in order that he can copy this house. And of course, always there's a ceremony. There's always, as Agamben said, a celebration after the work. So they have been working, training for 3 months, and now they have to celebrate the end of the ceremony, the end of the working, and now they become fighter soldiers in the field, and not only trainers inside the camp. And who will attend the ceremony? Of course, the families. Yes, all the work it's dealing with Palestinian. And again, my interest is that these Palestinian soldiers of the Israeli army joining the Israeli army in order to build the house. So the ceremony will come their families, their parents. And the work, it's 85 images, so I'm just showing you just a shot from here and there. It's there's a publication about this work. If you are interested, if you want it, I can post it. And this is the training, how they should do in a case that a grenade was thrown to them. And this training, they had to do it in this room because it was a punishment. They had first to run around the camp for 7 times, and then they had to come and do this exercise. And it was a punishment because they wrote in the wall, as you see, there's a writing in the wall in Arabic, the writing in Arabic. And of course, it's forbidden for them to write and to speak in Arabic in this camp, and inside the Israeli army. But these guys, since they are called chair warmers, so they are not able to read and write in Hebrew. And the meaning of chair warmer, that inside they hardly finish 8 years in school. And mainly they warmed the chair in the school and they didn't learn. So they are unable to read Hebrew and to write Hebrew. And they are forbidden to write in Arabic. And when they catch doing it, they receive punishment from their Israeli Jewish officer. And excuse me to repeat the word Jewish, but because I'm using it because in Israel, there's a Palestinian and there's a Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, Christian, Cherkess, Druze, and Jewish. And these guys, the Palestinian guys, they have an Israeli passport, so they are not of course, a Palestinian from the West Bank and from Gaza cannot join the Israeli army. The only ones that can join it, it's the Palestinians that have an Israeli passport, and not even the Palestinian of East Jerusalem, because the Palestinian of East Jerusalem, they don't have an Israeli passport. And this is why I'm using Jewish in order to make the not to include in the Israelis the Palestinian of citizen of Israel. And yes, it's. I'm interested in this, the need even to fight for a home, and what even more than that here, these guys are, they join the army, and of course, to join the army, it means also that I'm taking the risk to die, to be killed. And many of these Palestinians, they were killed in the Israeli army because they have to be in the frontier. They are the trackers. They track the tracks that other Palestinian resistance will leave when entering the border of Israel. And knowing that they can lose their body in order to have a house, which for me it's symbolic in this photograph, which is a group of photographs of the sleeping soldier, which is the dead soldier. Okay. The next work. Because not to forget, I'm dealing with home and not the soldier. So it's called Eastern LGBT. Eastern LGBT, it's lesbian, gays, bisexual, transgender, and of course today it's a stretch. So the next work I will call it LGBTQI. And Eastern, it means people who come from East in our term, not the Central Europe. Our East, it's the Middle East and the Muslim countries, including India, Pakistan, and Somalia, where I photograph people from these countries that they had to leave their country, leave their community, because they cannot live with their body as they wish, with the sexual and gender orientation. So, and in order, taking to my account that the body is the first home. So in order to live in my home, the first home, the body, I had to leave my collective home and to immigrate to a foreigner society in order to practice my home. This is what I thought, and this is what I went to do in London, in Zurich, in Tel Aviv for the Palestinian, and in Barcelona, looking for people from Muslim origins and Arab origins that left their homeland because they couldn't practice their body as a home. I was surprised to find something interesting, which is led me to think about this work. It's the relation between the individual and the community, and the need of belonging. And then and what made me curious to see what does it mean if you see with this person and with the luggage in the floor, on the right side there is a luggage. So the first time I saw these persons with the luggage, as naive, I asked, where are you traveling after the party? And they were not, nobody understood why I'm asking, so they just invented the story that they are going somewhere. And later I discovered that this is actually the luggage that they will bring with it their own home for the body, the clothes, the makeup, the mirror, etc. And they will practice the home inside the nightclub where they are allowed to do it, in London, for example. And why they need to do it? They are already in London and they are safe. They are not in Baghdad or not in Nablus. Because when they came to London and maybe even walk all the way to London from Baghdad, they choose to live in the neighborhood that has an immigrants from their country, and that they left the homeland in order to live their body, and then when they come to London, they choose to live inside their community. Nobody forced them. Nobody forced you to live there, so you choose, and that's exactly the issue that I find that it's not fair for the community not to respect the individual wish of being at home with the body. لازم أخلص؟ Okay. So from here, you allowed me to jump all the way to, because I have to finish. It's I can jump to the last Syria. Okay. So back to the fighting. I jump from دم الجيش كذا house starves when you are away. It's a work I did in Poland, looking at the orphanage, and again, it's a lab condition to check if we as a human being, do we really need a home? So I wanted a place where from the beginning there's no the mainstream, what we are educated to know about home. And then I went to France and work of the who decide for you what is your home that you fight for. So I took the event of 9th of June in center of France, where the resistance fought against the German occupying their home to protect their home, the French home. But the next day they went to Vietnam, Indochine, to fight against the Indochinian resistance that in their time wanted to free their home. My last work, it's called Death. And Death, it's about the representation of the absence. It's about Palestinian martyrs and martyrdom operators who, in order to have the homeland, had to sacrifice their bodies and their home, their house. Because Palestinians who join the armed resistance groups, they will be punished by Israel by destroying their homes, their family homes, and by shooting, by being shooted by the Israelis. And it doesn't matter if it takes 5 or 7 years. At the end, the Israeli will catch them in their bed and will shoot them. And this has happened with all the case of the resistance fighters, or they are physically killed, or they were taken to the Israeli prisoners. How can one photograph? I wanted to photograph the martyrs. Okay, very good. But how can I photograph somebody who's dead? I will tell you when I show you some images. So now I concentrated in one region, Nablus. It's the biggest city, the biggest inhabited city in the West Bank. And Nablus had 4 refugee camps inside it. In the middle of Nablus, there's a refugee camp called Al Ain. The biggest not inhabited. Persons per square meters in the world. It's in Balata refugee camp, which is in the photo. We see it here, and then Askar and New Askar, Old Askar. There are already 4. So the work it's divided with two spaces, the representation of the martyrs in the private space and in the public space. In the private space, it's in the family, and usually the sitting room will be provided for the pictures of the martyr. And one thing it's extremely important, these posters are not propaganda. These posters do their function with two things. In my opinion, the first things, the function of these posters, it's to for the Palestinian to accept the death of their relatives, their sons, daughters, without achieving the goal. These guys, they were killed because they fight to have the homeland. Looking at after the first Intifada, second Intifada, there's no Palestine. It's still occupied by Israel. The army is still in front of each one's door and can access everywhere, anytime, from sea, earth, the air, and killed anybody. So all these people who died, they died actually for nothing. How can a family accept this absurd? In my eyes, this is exactly what the posters does. The poster make the martyr as a hero, and then I didn't lose my daughter or my son for nothing. My daughter and son lost their life for Palestine, and they are a hero. The other things, which is not in my opinion, it's the opinion of the theoretician, the sociology theoretician, that it's to that this poster, it's to prepare for the next generation to accept and to be ready that they can be killed, to make the death as something normal inside the society, and not to be surprised and not to be afraid of it, and kind of to accept that all Palestinian children, almost all Palestinian children, they piss in their beds in the night because the occupation is entering their life 24 hours. So, we continue. It's 86 photographs, and again built out of groups. Each group deal with the one issue. For instance, this is a picture out of 5 where the posters and the memorial issues for the dead people are in the living space, and the family living inside it. There's no an effort to show it. It's there. So, and always each picture will have a text. I call it the caption, and it's give the place, the date when I took this photograph, and what do we see there. So, for instance, with this, it's Balata refugee camp, the 12th of February 2012. To give the date and the place for me, it was to say, Ahlam Shibli was there. It's and I wasn't interested that this. I'm not interested to bring an evidence that this is the truth. I'm interested to tell you this is my truth. So I was there, I saw it, and this is the truth I tell you. Yeah, right. So I continue with the next image. Yes, of course. Which is, it's actually to tell what's there, the name of the persons, because of course they are denied their right to have their names by the other, the Israelis. So I'm interested to give the names of the persons. So the brother of... Okay, that's it for now. Thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you. If anybody interested after I got the book about this work.
We are running late, but I think it's still worth to have a couple of questions from the audience, if you join us. And then Mia will say a few words. Is that okay? So who wants to lead? Who wants to ask anything to any of the guests? Sit there.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Miriam Weston is my name, curator from the Netherlands. And I was wondering how the public reactions are to either the work of the video works of Mrs. Duarte, Mr. Doherty, and to your work, Shibli. I was wondering how people in Ireland, Northern Ireland, reacted to your work, and how I don't know whether your work is being presented in
for instance,
Ramallah, or I don't know whether there was any possibility for your work to be shown in either Israel or Ramallah, and what the reactions were to the works. So actually, it's two questions.
Okay, so first I'm supporting boycott of Israel. So since 2005 I'm boycotting Israel. I don't show there. I did show trackers there. Into the last work I showed in Israel was trackers, and I was I had to show it there because it was supported by the lottery, and in the condition that I show it in Israel. I did these things when I was in my early stupidity time, but since then I grew up. And in Palestine, unfortunately, I didn't show my work because there's no space to show it, and I was invited to show it in the Goethe Institution or the French Cultural Center in the corridor, which I also refuse to show. So I talk about my work for students. I go and I have to find a solution how to show it in Palestine.
But do you want to say any words about the reaction in Europe? Because your work has been shown in Europe a lot. I'm asking if you want to say or no.
And you want that I refer to what happened in Judea?
You refer to what you think you need to refer.
Okay. I showed my work, actually, excuse me, you warm me up, thank you. I showed my work in Jordan. And in Jordan, it's mean for, I did a work in 2007 in the Palestinian refugee camps. And in the institution where I showed the work, we sent a bus to bring the people I photographed to see the work. And then Palestinians from Syria made the way to come and to see the work because it was dealing with the specific village from 48 that they became refugees in Syria and Jordan. So they came to see the work and to see how it's presented and the question. As long as the work is bringing positive question or not visible criticism, it's accepted. For instance, with the trackers, there's a refusing from the Palestinian side to deal with it. And even when I did the work trackers, it's the Palestinian who serve in the Israeli army. My friends, my colleagues, artists, they were not happy that I'm doing the work, and everybody were telling me, you will fail doing it because it will be used by Israel as to encourage Palestinians to go to the Israeli army. And of course, I had this fear, and even when I went to families it was a nightmare because suddenly I'm coming to a family. I photograph their son who joined the Israeli army. This son, he is in the center and my attention. And his brother who didn't go to the army, and nobody came to ask and to photograph him. And then, why I don't join the army? Here my brother is central, becoming in the center, in the focus. So it made me uncomfortable not to volunteer in a different way to light this issue, but the more question was when this work was again with the German institution, Goethe institution in Gaza. They wanted to show it in Gaza, and I myself said, no, I'm sorry, I don't show it because there's these soldiers. Part of them, they now serve in Gaza, and I don't want to accuse anybody lost of his life when this person is recognized through my photographs and to be kept because I photograph him, her. So that's it.
Okay. Well, I actually had the opportunity last year when I made the show in Derry to show a large body of the work in that city really for the first time. I mean, I had shown the work on a number of occasions, but not to the same extent. So in some ways, the title of the exhibition, Unseen, kind of reflected the fact that the work had been largely unseen in that place. And as part of the exhibition, we made a book that, for the first time, brought all of the photographic work together in one volume. So part of the kind of endeavour for that exhibition really was to position the work in the place of its production. Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, the artist is probably not the best person to ask about how people respond to the work because it's difficult to gauge. But again, because the show was in that place where I live, I mean, I was able to kind of be in and out of the exhibition every week. So I ended up talking to quite a few people who visited. And it's curious when you show the work in the place where it's produced or your hometown, because the stories kind of range from the anecdotal where people say, oh, I recognize that place, or do you remember what happened on that street? Or so there was a level of that kind of anecdotal kind of recognition of people and places and events, through to people, I don't know, I suppose being kind of glad that the work was there because it provided an opportunity to kind of reflect on the state, if you want, of the kind of peace process, to use that word again, and also the kind of position of an artist in relation to the kind of official line, if you want, or the official kind of set of images that usually describe the place. I mean, the show wouldn't have been supported by the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, for example, you know. So yeah, there was I think a lot of support for the exhibition. You know, that was my kind of sense of it, and the idea of an artist kind of assuming that role or that position. You know, that was my kind of general feeling about it. I mean, when I show the work abroad or in different places, then it's difficult at times not to think that one is kind of understood as fulfilling another kind of role, like the Irish person. So, I mean, I think no matter where the work is seen, there is some of the reading and some of the ways in which the work is understood and perceived is very dependent on where it's seen and what kind of investment that audience may have with that set of ideas. So, for example, if I show the work in the United States, I often encounter people who call themselves Irish American, and they have a very kind of strange perception of Ireland sometimes. You know, I actually made a work in 1999 in Chicago with the Renaissance Society called True Nature, which was it partly consisted of a number of extracts from some interviews that I made with people who I managed to find through the Renaissance Society in Chicago, who described themselves as Irish American. But I only wanted to talk to, or ask them to find me people who called themselves Irish American, but who'd never been to Ireland. So their kind of understanding of Ireland was kind of shaped either by kind of family histories and family stories, or through the movies or news or other kind of sources like literature or whatever. So the part of the project then was asking these people to describe Ireland, or to describe a kind of place that came to mind when they thought about Ireland, which ranged from things like green rolling hills to, you know, castles and lakes and all kinds of stuff, you know. But not many people spoke about, it was a kind of like almost a Disney version of Ireland that they kind of wanted to kind of keep in their head, which was kind of interesting. So I mean, the work is, to get back to the kind of larger point, I mean, I think the work is, how the work is read and understood in different places is very dependent on who the audience is and the overall context, I think, you know. There's no one fixed way in which it's understood.
Mia, do you want to another question, and then I think we have to pass to Mia. Okay. Ahlam, all of them will, all the guests will be today again. So if they, you know, we can engage now personally. I think that's the best as well.
Thank you. My name is Umbretta. I'm an independent curator from Italy, based in the States for about 15 years. A question for you, Willie Doherty, about the importance of the text and the voiceover in your work. It seems to have equal weight as the imagery. So I was wondering if you can address that a little bit, whether it's your own writing, whether you're collaborating, or depending on the project, what comes first. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the text started, I think, right from the beginning when I started making these photographs of the landscape, and maybe it was out of a sense of you know, I don't know, frustration, or I think it was very much related to the idea of having a voice. Because I think when I started making those photographs, it was out of a sense of feeling disenfranchised in some way from having a voice within a larger political process, as well as not having a voice in the art world. So in a way, I think the early work appropriates that kind of device of image and text, which at the time when I was making the work in the mid-80s was something that was not uncommon in terms of a wider kind of artistic practice. Since that, I mean, the use of voiceover in the video works, I think, is in some ways kind of replaced the imposition of text on the photographs. Sometimes the two feel a little bit kind of inseparable. Sometimes I make work that doesn't have any voice or text in it at all. But generally, I am kind of interested in language, and particularly in the context of how the broader political context in Ireland is kind of understood and represented, and I guess kind of vocalized, you know. So my interest in language in relation to the broadcast media ban, for example, you know, was an interest in both kind of hearing what the voice of the person who you're not supposed to hear sounds like, but I was also interested in giving a voice to that voice that had been silenced. So it's a kind of complicated relationship, I think, with language that kind of ebbs and flows a little bit, but I think it kind of originated from this kind of desire to participate and have a voice. So the work has always, I think at some level, carried that thread or that train of thought through it. And the work that I'm kind of currently making is a video work that doesn't have, although it has an actor in it or a character in it, he doesn't speak. So, and it's accompanied by a set of photographs that don't have any text either. So it does kind of come and go a little bit, you know.
Though oddly, the actor does the voiceover in an earlier film.
Yeah. I mean, this work that I'm making, the actor is Stephen Ray, who's an Irish actor who, oddly, well, not oddly, you know, purposely did a voiceover for me in a work I made in 2007 called Ghost Story.
Yeah.
But he was also the actor who, when the broadcast media ban existed in the UK, he was the actor who was the voice of Gerry Adams in a very famous documentary that Channel 4 made, which was really around the time of that the peace process was really kind of being formalised and coming together, but it was before the broadcast media ban was removed by John Major's government, which I think was in 1994. So I think this programme, which was really designed to kind of put the voice of Sinn Féin back on British television, was broadcast, I think, late in 1993. Stephen Ray was the voice of Gerry Adams in this broadcast. So I was interested in using him for Ghost Story because I knew that he had this kind of history of being the voice of Sinn Féin in terms of British broadcasting. So I am, you know, generally I'm kind of interested in how language becomes enmeshed in looking at the political context in Ireland.
We have to move on. I'm sorry. But it would be very interesting to ask or to speak with Ahlam about the use of text as well in our work, because as you can, as it's both of them work a lot with image. They're making image in which text and narrative plays a strong part, and it would be interesting to understand why this need and different models and strategies to apply it. But I'm sorry, otherwise we will start really to become light. So Mia will say something,
Yes.
and then where we will meet you upstairs in the galleries.
Yeah.
He's here, so Hugh will introduce us to the Mac and to the galleries and the show upstairs, and then we will have like 15-20 minutes to see the show upstairs, and then we go to Derry, and on the bus it's like 2 or 3 hours. 2 hours. We'll have time to continue our discussion. If you want, we can really make it formal, like with another mic. So, Mia, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we could swap.
Yes,
Miguel.
it's fine.
Thanks so much for inviting
because you're
me, and
here.
also thanks very much to IKT for having me. Thank you. I'll take 10 more minutes of your time. I know that one could have responded to these very rich presentations in so many different ways, and ideally, really, the discussions could last forever. But this is a relatively intimate gathering, and we'll be together for another day or so. So I do hope these questions will be debated on the bus and so on. So I would like to close today's proceedings by connecting elements from IKT's history with, I quote, another circumstance of disruption, as Miguel has so nicely formulated with Northern Ireland. The brief was to do this in a manner that shows personal links to, and indeed, I first have to acknowledge that I sit here with many hats on as a CCA board member, as former MAC trustee, seeing this building come into existence, having initiated with Suzanne Lyle from the Arts Council a hub for critical debate on visual art in Northern Ireland. This is its inaugural moment. Rooted in Joseph Beuys' studies, I have invested in the art from and critical debate in Belfast for over 10 years, and I speak as somebody who is about to move on, despite the great purpose that I still see, and I'm sure will continue to see in engaging with Northern Irish art in the future. The other circumstance of disruption, to pick up this phrase again, can be understood in terms of cognitive dissonance or philosophical incoherence, disruption of sensory awareness or sensitivity between feeling and thinking. That's all difficult to capture. Practically, it manifests a state of affairs that some peers of mine here in Belfast have variously described as treacle, through which one needs to wade in order to make anything happen, or as the present bureaucratic phase of the Troubles, where paperwork buffers and preserves the status quo, positivist thinking and hierarchies. We are, according to the UN, in an emerging democracy. What might this mean for art and curatorial practice? Why should you care? When I think of artwork that shows such post-traumatic buffering that makes effects of trauma palpable, it is Rodney Graham's Rheinmetall Victoria, where theatre snow falls on an unused typewriter that had found its way from Germany to the New World in the 1930s, or Joseph Beuys's Snowfall, both of which I considered as linked in the post-war German theme of Tacita Dean's An Aside exhibition. One could add foggy work, buffering work from Willie Doherty's early practice, such as here. But in this moment, another dampening, layered work that can make us reflect on a great variety of intricacies should be in the foreground for IKT-related reasons and Northern Ireland-related ones. Royden Rabinovich's Greased Cone, originally from 1965. Harald Seemann exhibited Rabinovich's work on many occasions, as did Jan Hoot and other respected curators. I had first shown the work in Joyce and Art in RHA Dublin 2004, where the formal quality of the delta stood in the foreground. The artist was amazed at the choice, since he had up to then just for himself considered the work to be an address to Brancusi's Portrait of James Joyce, 1928. Back then, I don't think I had fully understood that the symbol of hierarchy, the cone, is being obscured and questioned here through attention to the potentially abject organic substance of Greece. Only writing about Rabinovich's work more recently, all things fell into place when I was asked to program cultural training or experiences, not to use the T word, for Northern Ireland's politicians for Politics Plus, an Atlantic Philanthropies funded democratization initiative. Peter Richards at the Golden Thread Gallery that you have visited invited the exhibition that needed to be curated in order to confront the politicians with contemporary art. The Ulster Museum had been eager to make my exhibition part of the collection's rehang last summer. It owns a Rabinovich barrel construction and blackboards that Joseph Beuys drew during his 3.5-hour lecture discussion there in 1974. The Ulster Museum cancelled the show at 2 weeks' notice and instead combined Beuys with Anthony Caro and Robert Balla. Some of you might have seen the room yesterday. To organise anything that would involve the politicians from all parties, to bring the funders into the building, would, under the present circumstances here, indeed have taken more than just 6 months to ponder. Similarly, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, to which we wrote to offer the work as a gift for its collection, has acknowledged our letter from early November 13, but hasn't responded. I'd like to think that the officers looked at this work with its minimalist allegiances, and it looked at them, to borrow a formulation from Georges Didier Huberman. Possibly made them reflect on the role of disgust in the dehumanization of one's neighbours, a prerequisite for violence, or came to intuit the fleeting nature and pliability of both the materials, rolled steel and grease, associated with Belfast's industrial heritage, and of power. Equilibrium grew into a potted history of artistic responses to post-conflict times. Friedrich Schiller's letters on the aesthetic education of man, following and countering the violent excesses of the French Revolution, stood beside Beuys's investment in friendships in Northern Ireland and Rabinovich's joint gift of work to the Museum Sztuki in Łódź, Poland, during martial law. This gift was then shown at a crucial time in the peaceful revolution in Warsaw, early '89. Rather than claiming, though, that art somehow builds peace directly, texts by and on Adorno and Beckett, who had been educated in Northern Ireland, who once worked in Belfast, combined to underpin my argument that such things happen and are best addressed indirectly, obliquely, just like I had found the best responses to Joyce being indirect ones, focused on epistemological changes through debate. According to Einstein, one can't solve problems with the thinking that led to them. Politicians were invited to a workshop featuring a performance exercise by Alistair McLennan too. You saw him yesterday. Attendance had been promised, but was atrocious. We had only a group of 6 with 2 party support staff and none of the elected members. We surmise that Northern Irish politicians are not as yet capable to enter a contemporary art gallery space. The next step is to take the work to the Assembly. Politics Plus is reincarnating and will make this happen. What appears to be threatening about contemporary art in a situation such as Northern Ireland is that it does not pretend to beautify the peace walls or save the world. An ironic world savings machine was developed here, but that it presents itself humbly as a presence, as a force of solidarity in the peace building that one claims to wish to do. Pretty much everybody wishes to do. It's quite another circumstance of disruption, all the more unsettling for its non-orthodox ways of being. All too often here, those in power merely act expediently and, of course, as they only can according to experience, without the occasional eruption of violence, they seem to surmise, without regular proof of dysfunctionality, the money would disappear. Therefore, the lowering of the spectacle is indeed threatening that short-sighted and disappearing path to economic well-being. The unfortunate effects of this thinking, and a likely response to any critique, in fact, is a circling of the wagons, or what psychologists call decision-making autism. The contextual interpretation of an art that understands itself to be analytical of society then can only reveal the usual posturing and triumphalism to be facade. Critical discourse will show it to be politesque, as an issue of kritische Berichte nicely put, a state of affairs that unfortunately transcends Northern Ireland. And I quote here the words earlier heard, peace does not equate to justice. Art on the Troubles has, as you've seen in the majority of the work at the Ulster Museum yesterday, traditionally been equated with some photography in the documentary vein, but usually with the neo-expressionist painting that adorned the walls, very much except Willie Doherty's contributions to that exhibition from my remarks here. That narrative, the neo-expressionist one, is reassuring. It is dealing in understandable currency of the indeed harrowing experiences on which press photography also focused, but it rarely transcends it. In the works of Ahlam, Shibli and Willie Doherty, on the other hand, the difficulty is acknowledged of making images that do something other than present fixed representation, works that are conscious of only showing one truth, and a constructed one at that, implying the wish to construct it in other, more democratic ways. Photography is strong in Northern Ireland. It has become well-established, well-supported, hegemonic practice. It continues to be strong where it shows the damaging effects of the still-ingrained positivist authoritarian thinking, where it reveals the glitches, engenders disruptions that, according to T.J. Damus, blur the boundaries between fiction and fact, and that can tell how raw and fragile a situation we're still inhabiting. I have found a Warburgian approach fruitful for analyzing, for example, Sandra Johnston's attention to revealing and involuntary gestures. She's another performance artist from here. A focus on disruption would be in keeping with Jean Ray's view that performance art was developed as initial, tentative, non-lingual but embodied project of mourning around the time of the Auschwitz trials, 20 years after the end of World War II. He and I had at the same time but differently found that Joseph Beuys had attempted to respond to the Holocaust. I was able to link this to his engagement with Joyce, with Ireland, its megalithic heritage, and eventually the motivation to invest personally and financially in the friendships he established here in 1974. Now that the Belfast Agreement is 16 years old, the story of performance art here is slowly being written and acknowledged. You're invited to return next year for an exhibition on this topic. The strength of Northern Irish performance art has still much to do with that Boycean legacy. On this history rests Belfast's self-organised artistic culture too. Hardly anyone involved did not go through Alistair McLennan's MFA, and I've had the pleasure of leading the PhD programme with Art Practice, one of the world's largest, which has also built on this legacy and a colloquium regularly inserting critical debate in public space. There is a problem, however, and I wish to say this in closing in order to propose one of the many reasons why why your visit here and hopefully your long-term engagement is so important. When artists respond to the triumphalism around them, the two traditions as much as the would-be economic or the orthodox certainties, politicians here, including environment ministers, are in the habit of denying climate change, for instance. When artists respond to the certainties, then with uncertainty, with fiction and alluring of the spectacle, they work towards educating both sensory and intellectual responses. They then rely on people to be willing to feel or have the energy to be adventurous enough to explore what it is that they should be doing with art. Under the presently still pervading circumstances of disruption, this is a lot to ask, particularly when art is no longer an A-level subject, when there is no art history, visual culture, or curatorial studies program in this part of the world, other than Catalysts, excellent training by doing initiative, and ICI's curatorial intensive that came to CCA Derry last year. And there is no art bookshop either in this part of Western Europe. Artists here have no commercial representation, no journal of record, a high proportion of decision makers on art who actively oppose the thinking that comes with contemporary art, and generally undereducated tiny audiences. Against all these odds, as you could hear and see, exciting art is created here. Curators are then the people who sustain it, both here and abroad, who persevere in presenting puzzling experiences, disempower unilateral representation, show weird greased cones, and possibly most importantly keep the debates going in writing, teaching, and discussion. You are the ones who open sense and senses, one person at a time. In such a small place as this, Alistair McLennan calls it a microcosm, one does see what the impact is of one's work, slowly. Manifesta may yet happen here in 2020 or later. Our initiative to bring it here dates from 2007. In a documentary film project, Prison Memories Archive, you can hear prison guards say, "Thinking was the enemy," feeling, of course, too. Exhibitions and all of what curators do are uniquely placed to combine thinking and feeling and insist on both. Nothing could be more fragile and more important than putting oneself into that position to work hard in order possibly eventually to be seen to stand for something positive too. At some point maybe, and to go right back to what Declan pointed out at the very beginning, the meaning of dissent in Northern Ireland or dissident will change from rogue terrorist not belonging to a grouping with which one can negotiate to independent thinker, enabler of democracy, innovation, and thus even economic well-being.
Rosalind Deutsche formulates specifically for public art what I think counts for all art. I quote, "As a site of debates about democracy, and not as critics frequently claim because public art is located in universally accessible public sites, public art reaches beyond the boundaries of arcane art world concerns." With and through a growth of critical debate, Ihab's analytical move on visual art in Northern Ireland, for example, with the help of the hub that I mentioned, exhibitions and writings elsewhere, and all that curators do, art can, as art, obliquely and lastingly, continue to make a contribution to the democratization in Northern Irish culture. Your assistance, alongside and for some of the most remarkable artists I know, would be greatly appreciated.